Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott and I finished God of War Ragnarok yesterday when I'm recording this. Now this is one hell of a sequel. One of those games that comes around every so often where you can't wait for other people to experience the story just to see what they make of various plot points and things that are in here. Now to review the game, I'm not going to be covering any spoilers whatsoever. Like I said, I'm looking forward to having all those conversations across the various WhatCulture Gaming podcasts that we do and just seeing what the hashtag discourse turns into after this game. Because this is a very, very risky sequel. I'm not going to tell you exactly why, but I will say that it takes about 15 hours to really kick in. Now, I know that's a massive, massive ask for a lot of people, but I feel like God of War Ragnarok is a testament to viewing something holistically and making sure you get through the whole thing to see how it all sits by the time you hit the end credits and then think about the journey that you've been on. It's worth saying that Ragnarok does build on everything from before. I want to cover a few negatives, and I feel like a lot of the talking points about this game will be centered on just how much is brought across from 2018's game, just how many combat animations are reused, the fact that you're kind of just re-unlocking the moves that you already had in 2018, if you know, depends on where your Kratos ended at the end of that game, but the skill tree is kind of a duplicate. You do have new signature moves per weapon, you do have overall a snappier feel to combat. It's a little bit faster than it was before, and you do start the game able to access more moves faster. The amount of XP that you get. For me, I was just running around doing a few side missions, jumping in the skill tree, and then just unlocking everything all at once, and then waiting until I got the next overall tier upgrade per weapon, and then I just had enough XP to buy all that stuff again. It's a much, much, much faster path than the original game. And that does mean that you get more moves faster, so you can hit the ground running a little bit more, but at the same time, you're still only really accessing combat moves that you had before, and if you already played through a hell of a lot of 2018's God of War, then you already know what that combat model feels like, and you're probably yearning for something else. Now, they have given you, or they do give you, a handful of more athletic abilities in terms of just hitting circle at various points in the world and being able to throw one of the Blades of Chaos out and just jump up to a different platform, maybe redirect combat, maybe separate some enemies out by getting away from them and moving away and whatever. But at the core of it, you're still using the same moves that you had before, minus the addition of elemental damage. There's a kind of a big focus on elemental build-up. That's where the game sort of tries to flesh out the RPG side of things, and you can spec Kratos in that direction to get through a lot of the harder mini-bosses and fights in general. But like I said, I can't stress how much that first 15 hours is this all you guys have? Is this all we're doing? You do get something else for the 15-hour mark in, which I won't spoil because it's one of the best reveals in the game. But I feel like my overall feeling after I finished the game, and I came in about 27, 28 hours. So there is like a 10 to 12-ish hour period after the switch, after the big change thing happens in the game, where I really felt like it played its hand. I feel like the entire 15-hour build-up was quite rote and quite formulaic and quite repetitive because they were doing a specific story beat that for me massively paid off. I feel like overall God of War Ragnarok is this beautiful, mature extrapolation of parenthood and responsibility and trusting someone and making sure that you're leaving the right lessons behind as you become a parent. And what does it mean to become a parent? What does it mean to instill knowledge in your child and make sure that they're okay for the world ahead of them whilst you go off and do whatever you need to do? Now, again, I look forward to the conversations that happen once everybody has seen this entire story play out, but they almost need to manufacture that feeling of waiting for something to happen, contemplating and waiting for things to kick in, which is why I would say that 15-hour build-up is intentional. I think they massively pay it off, and everything that comes after that is unbelievably satisfying. Some of the best cutscenes, some of the best depictions, some of the best acting and presentation I've ever seen in anything, let alone video games. But I can't shake just how much there is a build-up and just how much a lot of people, may be expecting something a lot faster in terms of being more immediate. New moves, new animations, new things like that. This is very much a sequel of the core gameplay, and then it's fleshed out after the 15-hour mark. All of this is to say that I think God of War Ragnarok sits alongside Red Dead Redemption 2, The Last of Us 2, Ghost of Tsushima, games that let you play their thematics, games that are enriched by just how much time you spend in their worlds, just how interactive they are overall. It's not about a specific minigame or a specific set piece or whatever, it's living that character's life for a certain amount of time. I feel like this is the rise of video game storytelling. For the longest time, we've always known what film tropes were, or what anime tropes are, or the golden age of TV, certain styles that the likes of Netflix might employ, but I feel like video games games have taken their time really, etching themselves out as a video game story. And I feel like the last 10 years or so have really seen certain titles reach certain levels of narrative immersion that I want to say God of War Ragnarok is very much next to. I get that that's massively vague, but I don't want anyone to spoil the story for you. I feel like you're better off, if you're going to play this, diving in and just getting completely immersed in all the confusion and all the, what are we actually doing? How the hell, is this a propellant story point for the first 10 to 15 hours, and letting the payoff and let the reveals come later, and land the way that I'm going to assume that they were supposed to. But overall, though, to round out the story side of things, and again, I just can't go into it in the review, but I love the thematics that are on display here. I was in tears multiple times. It's worth shouting out by himself. Chris Judge's performance as Kratos is absolutely one of a career best, absolutely one of the best depictions of parenthood in any medium. Massively just feel for the character, and I think if you know the history of the character himself, if you play the old school God of War games, you notice how ridiculous and over the top and gore happy that series was. That was then kind of grounded and recontextualized in 2018's game, which was all, what if this dude regretted everything? What if this guy didn't necessarily feel like he could love or be loved and flesh those things out? What's the next natural stepping stone after the end point of 2018? We had this big mystery sort of let off at the end of that game. Why is Atreus being referred to as Loki? What is the prophecy? What does it mean in regards to the overall idea that Kratos' ex-wife knew exactly what he was going to do and knew exactly where he was going to be, and where do we go from there? Where does that leave Kratos' mindset, and where does that leave Atreus/Loki? I absolutely love the story that they get to once they start playing their hand. Like I said, Christopher Judge's performance as Kratos, there are so many very well done, subtle facial animation ticks and just really incredible performance capture. That for me, there's just something about that character being not necessarily emotionally overwhelmed, but showing more emotion. It's almost like he's like a big leaden oak tree, just realizing that he can move and feel and that it's okay and things like that. And I absolutely love that performance. Also, massive shout out to Sony Santa Monica as Atreus. I think the two of them, their chemistry is one of the best things here. And as of last night, I went back to the original God of War. I was just curious what it felt like to go back to the start of that game. I think it's worth shouting out that both Kratos and Atreus have incredible arcs across both these games. Cory Barlog / Sony Santa Monica have said this is the last game in the Norse mythology, so we'll see if they ever want to do more in this setting. But the way things are, it feels like this is a perfect second installment. This feels like a perfect extrapolation and expansion of all the thematics that we were getting at in the original and all these specific character beats that were so fascinating in the first place. Let's pivot a bit into combat, because I feel like the game does eventually get there when they finally give you a new weapon and you realize what's actually going to be down on the D-pad the whole time, and then you get to start experimenting a lot more, getting a lot more confident with the various runic attacks that you have and the elemental buildup that I mentioned earlier. All that stuff factors in because you have enemies that have specific elemental shields. Maybe they have something that they need to be hit with a specific type of arrow before you can even knock a rider off the top of a beast or something like that. But that goes alongside, like I said before, a lot of, let's just say reused or revisited animations, and that overall feel being snappier, being sped up, feeling a bit like a sequel, but not being overhauled. I'm kind of here and there on the fact that the vast majority of the runic abilities that you unlock, the magic attacks that Kratos has, where you hold L1 and then push R1 or R2, in this game, they are way off the main path. You'll still get some, again, after the 15-hour mark, you'll start getting a lot more, but if you're not doing all the side missions, you'll realize just how much you've been doing the same moves over and over again, and how you probably won't even have a heavy rune attack for a good 10 to 15 hours in. I would encourage you to go do the side missions. They are very rewarding, and a lot of character building dialogue, a lot of specific character beats are in there, and the conversations that you want to have between characters are in there too, which thematically ties in with everything else that's going on. The idea that Ragnarok is coming up, the prophecy is coming true, or is it, and how much time do we have? Let's figure all that stuff out. The more side missions that I did, the more rewarding I found them. I just feel like they should at least give you more runic attacks on the main path. For those people who still want to go through the main game or prioritize the main game, otherwise, why is it even called the main game? At some point, you kind of need to stitch those two sides of the game together and make sure that it feels rewarding, regardless of whether you're chasing the story or chasing exploration. So yeah, combat for me, it's enjoyable. It's as enjoyable as it was in 2018's game. And I feel like over the years, the last 4 years, there has been a contingent of people who have come out and said, look, God of War 2018 was absolutely brilliant and I loved the story in it, but the combat just wasn't for me. It is massively different from the original titles, and for some people it just didn't really line up. Now there are small things here that I do feel like get in the way. I like the God of War combat model overall, but I feel like it can't handle group encounters very well. And there's small things that change here, like the ability for you to take tons of damage even though you're in the middle of an animation, or the fact that you can't break out of an animation to deflect when you might want to. Some animations let you, some of them don't. I feel like in 2018's it was more, you knew that you could block reliably or counter reliably, whereas sometimes here it feels like you're stuck in an animation begging for Kratos to do something and he's just being attacked over and over again. A lot of the mini bosses here, not like the Valkyries in the original game, but not them again. A lot of the mini bosses here rely on difficulty by way of just how much of a life bar, how much of your life bar they're going to take out with one attack. I personally don't get anything out of that. I would much rather have an encounter with an enemy where I'm going back and forward, I'm timing deflections and blocks and whatever, and making sure that I'm punching through some sort of overall onslaught than just dodge, and eventually get a hit in. God of War overall does find a decent enough balance with those things, but sometimes you'll just come up against an enemy, a random mini boss in the open world, that will just wipe you out with a standard attack because it's a little bit higher in level. You need to go away and grind some stuff out, come back and fight it, maybe focus on your elemental attacks or whatever, but it can feel a bit cheap, getting knocked out of your animation, getting knocked out of the rage state that Kratos is in, just because some creature is just a higher level than you. Like, I mean, it's RPG tropes 101, but at the same time, I think there's other ways to mitigate it if you're skillful enough. And I'm curious what people will think of that particular side of combat. To address presentation stuff, there was a whole bunch of conversations that I very much contributed to of just how much of a PS5 game is this going to feel like? Is this going to feel like a PlayStation 4 game running better on a PlayStation 5? And I mentioned in the early impressions for the game that there are a ton of loading animations in this. Lots of stuff that we've seen in loads of games across the last generation. Things where characters just have to squeeze through parts of the environment while the rest of it opens up. They happen very, very, very frequently, especially if you're going down the story path. There are lots of parts where Kratos just has to crouch and get through something, or squeeze sideways. I know there was a whole discussion on Twitter with various game devs coming in, and one of Naughty Dog's devs just said, look, it's an intentional thing because it means that you then approach an environment from a specific perspective, and that can be one of the best ways to introduce you to parts of a level. I totally get that, but I feel like overall there was that whole conversation, that whole presentation from Mark Cerny from Sony, who literally said the whole idea of the PlayStation 5 and the SSD is to get away from loading overall and designing levels that can be massively sprawling and can just be enjoyed without having even to think about loading whatsoever. God of War Ragnarok is not the game that will make you forget about loading. Things are very much minimized, but in terms of fast travel, you're still going through magic gates, waiting for the Yggdrasil tree to load, you're running around, you're going back through another gate, and then you're in the next level. It's the same as the 2018 game, just by sheer fact that this game had to run on PlayStation 4, which I have to imagine will be a jaw-dropping PlayStation 4 game, because it still runs like absolute liquid butter on PlayStation 5. I had it on the high performance mode, and I also have an HDMI 2.1, so that meant that it was in the high performance mode overall. There's like a bunch of different toggles, but I had it at checkerboard 4K 60, which was absolutely gorgeous. The hilarity of going from this to Gotham Knights in 30 FPS was like night and day, ironically. Last thing I want to shout out on the presentation side of things is the music by Bear McCreary. Bear McCreary's score for 2018's God of War was absolutely phenomenal. I love the Kratos theme that sort of creeps in across that game, and it gets grander as he does various actions across that story. Here you've got various leitmotifs and various pieces of music that accompany Atreus as well. Not that they weren't there before, but I feel like there's a much bigger impetus given to the idea of Kratos and Atreus working together as they get older together and they figure each other out and their different motivations and their mentalities and everything else. The music here is absolutely astonishing. There are various parts in this, various set pieces and cutscenes where you're sort of playing pieces of music that line up with Kratos' motivations and his general headspace, and then something a little bit lighter or a little bit more playful or a little bit more adventurous will come in to represent Atreus, and you've literally got this idea of every single cutscene, every single overall motivation coming true with an audio footprint as it is in the visuals. I know that various games go for this, but I feel like Ragnarok absolutely nails it, and I just want to shout out Bear McCreary's score. Overall, the audio side of God of War Ragnarok is top notch. So overall, God of War Ragnarok is one of the hardest games to review because I can't tell you about all the parts that make it such an incredibly recommendable experience. I also want to say that you get so much more out of it if you've played 2018's God of War, which in itself you got so much more out of if you played the original trilogy. It's one of those games that is capping off, let's say, 15 years or something of a character evolving in front of us and going through various different times and various games that just felt like they were gory as hell or whatever, and then being completely recontextualized in 2018. I feel like Ragnarok is the perfect continuation of where we left off in 2018, but at the same time, because like I said, there is that really big, almost aimless feel to the first sort of 15 hours whilst the characters figure out the various parts of the prophecy or chase various ways of finding solutions, that I do think means that the overall package isn't as tight as 2018's was. You've also got the fact that so many parts of the combat are reused, and that just general idea of waiting for so long before it kicks in. Once you hit that point at about the 15-hour mark where you finally get a new ability, a new overall thing that changes combat, I feel like that's the thing where I was sitting there in real time just saying, why was this not here earlier? And it's not that I don't get what they were going for. I think it pays off masterfully. But if I'm telling you in a review capacity about this game, there is a big wait before it really feels like a sequel. I think that's one of the overall points to underline here, is that it is worthwhile. I love the story and I can't wait for you guys to see it and for more people to talk about it. But at the same time, I can only really give this 4.5 stars. I'm going to give it slightly less than 2018's God of War just because of the way that it rolls out overall. It's not that it's not a massively recommendable game, but I don't feel like it's as tight, as pristine, as worthwhile, let's say, in regards to where it sits in the God of War canon as 2018's was. So maybe I'll get skewered for that. I have no idea what the reviews are going to be for this. I have the game, thankfully, a couple of weeks early. Massive shout out to Sony for giving us early access to the game itself. But yeah, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I'll catch you next time.